So it's good to have you all here. My name is Ken Levinson. I'm the Executive Director of the Passive House Network. We are a national nonprofit focused on training, education, networking, knowledge sharing to support Passive House buildings across the United States and around the world for that matter. And it's our pleasure today to have Andrew Peel with us of Peel Passive House Consulting to talk about certification issues, in particular concerning multifamily construction. For the agenda today, I'll do a brief introduction of Andrew, and then he will do a relatively short segment on sort of the basics, some of the basics around certification, demystify some of that, and then we'll dive into the Q&A and discussion session. We hope to have a lively discussion. We did get one question before this event. We look forward to you putting questions into the chat as we go through and are talking about these different issues. And we'll curate those and bring them together and make hopefully a good sense of a strong conversation in discussing all of this. So without further ado, let's get going. I want to make the simple point that education is the key. Education is the transformative act in changing our vocabularies, changing our conversations, our expectations. And when we're looking to certify buildings and actually execute on the high performance promise of Passive House, taking the proper education along the way is critical. And we've highlighted three aspects here that is super important. One, the core certified Passive House designer course. Of course, the tradesperson on the contractor side is also very important, but the designing side is where we're going to set everything in motion. If you haven't taken the course yet, certainly consider it. The PHPP in advanced specialized courses is really, it's fundamental to it. We offer it as an add-on to the basic core courses and is the most fundamental of the additional courses. And there's a long range. We'll talk more about that in a moment as well. And then finally, we do see the certification process as a fundamental part of your Passive House education. In many ways, you're going to learn the most by doing, and it's a lifetime of learning. So we'll talk about how those things dovetail going forward. So I want to note that regarding the Certified Passive House Designer course, we have the on-demand course, which you're probably aware of. It's always available. You can start at any time, and then there's a series of exams scheduled over the year in 5 different cohorts. So depending on when you start, the exams will shift around the calendar year. Super flexible, comprehensive, and involves some live online Q&A as well as the pure on-demand. But we also have begun doing regionally oriented, organized CPHD courses in a hybrid format. We have 2 starting September 9th this fall, one for the Rocky Mountain region and one for the Northeast region. And so if you're in either of those, we really encourage you to take a look. And if you have colleagues or others who may be interested, this is a paced, scheduled hybrid version where you're doing much of the fundamentals on the on-demand platform, but having weekly check-ins with live online, doing each of the sections, and then completing that and having an in-person training as well before you're going on to the exam prep and the exam itself. So do check that out. So it's my pleasure to introduce Andrew Peel here today. He is one of the foremost experts on Passive House in North America, if not the world. He's the founder, managing partner, managing principal of Peel Passive House Consulting. He's a certifier, he's a consultant, and a trainer. He has authored technical papers, done technical research, academic experience. He worked at the Institute in Germany for a time, worked in the UK, and is based in Canada, one of a handful of certifiers there. His company, Peel Passive House, also provides consulting services as well as certification services. Those fundamental trainings, the CPHD and PHPP we were just talking about, as well as a suite of master courses where you can really dive in and go deep. And we'll see, I think, in the discussion today around multifamily, there's all kinds of different areas where we need to go deeper than we might typically, certainly with single family homes. So with that, it's my pleasure to hand it off to Andrew for our brief introduction here, and I'll flip as we go.
Great, thank you, Ken. So just first wanted to highlight that recently the Passive House Institute has actually issued version 10 of the criteria document. So that particularly for those who have been through the certification process before, but of course anyone new to it as well, it's good to be aware that there's a new criteria document. I've forgotten the exact publication date, but essentially now that new criteria have been published, going forward, all new projects will be required to adopt the new criteria. And so we're in a bit of a transition period. Obviously, if you have an older project that started before the release of criteria, then naturally you can continue with the older criteria. If there's any debt.
Well, we do want to, sorry if I interrupt along the way, Andrew, but just to clarify, you may be getting to it, but that in the United States with the IP version, because we don't actually have a version of PHPP yet with the new criteria baked into it.
Yes, that's great.
We're
yeah, exactly.
Still allowed to use new projects to use the old criteria, although you're encouraged to use the new criteria as informational and guidance.
That's great. Yeah, a very good point. Thank you for bringing that up, Ken. Exactly. Yeah. So where you're using IP version of PHPP, version 10 has not been released yet. So when that is published, then the new criteria in IP will become in effect as well. So yeah, just wanted to point this out that we're in a bit of a transition period, just when in doubt, just speak to the certifier that you may be working with on a new project to clarify what would be required. It's good to highlight, refresh for those who may be out a bit of a touch. There are some core standards, 3 core standards that the Institute has developed and maintained. You've got let's say the original Passive House standard, which also now has, for a while, has had different classes, the Classic, Plus, or Premium, which recognizes additional energy efficiency as well as integration of renewable technology. There's the EnerFit standard for retrofit buildings. So for existing buildings that would be challenged to meet the Passive House building standard, we have the retrofit option. And again, this also has the different classes of Classic, Plus, and Premium. We also have the PHI low energy building. So for projects where either of those standards may not be suitable for whatever reason, this is certainly a good standard that can be worked towards as well. In terms of EnerFit, again, some of you may have been involved in EnerFits. For others, would be very new. But we're certainly seeing a greater uptake of EnerFit in different types of buildings. So it's really exciting because we obviously need some mass adoption of a standard like EnerFit to address our existing stock. And there are 2 pathways, and on different projects, we've had to use different one of the 2 different pathways, and it varies depending on the building type, right? But we do have a more performance-based path, which is more akin to what you'd see with a new build passive house. And then there's a more prescriptive approach, looking at component-wise requirements as well. Both have validity. One will make likely more sense on a given project, depending on its characteristics. And you can see there is some variation by climate as well, right? So depending on your climate, you'll want to check what specific requirements apply to your project. And in terms of certifiers, I mean, there are now over 100 across the world, and there are numerous working in North America. So we at Peel Passive House happen to have, be one company, but there are numerous companies both based in North America or specifically in the US, as well as others around the world that do provide services into North America as well. So we have a link there you can review to see who are active certifiers, and reach out to whoever you feel would be a good fit for your project. We also have a group, the North American Certifiers Circle. So this is an active group of companies working in as certifiers in North America, and so we collaborate together just to ensure consistency of how the standards applied in North America, discuss any technical issues that come up, and knowledge sharing. So while there's competition, there's also a good level of collaboration, which is just a part and parcel of how we do things in Passive House. And in terms of certification process, particularly if you're embarking on a certification for the first time, very important to understand how the process works, and certainly best practices as well. And so there's a certain way we'd recommend engaging with a certifier throughout the project process from design through construction. And here we have, this is meant to be read. We're going to be sharing the slides with you after the presentation, so you'll have this for reference. But yeah, there's a kind of visual flow chart to give you an idea of how that might flow through the project, as well as more kind of concrete description of different key stages in the certification process, including importantly after construction, when the building's completed, occupied, what kind of final checks and documentation need to be provided as well. Okay, in terms of document collation and submission, this is certainly something, as a certified Passive House designer or consultant, you'd be tasked with preparing to, submit to the certifier, as well as engage with them through the review process. And the Passive House Institute does maintain its own online platform. And you're encouraged to check that out and see if it kind of fits how you work, the work stream. It's particularly relevant to look at, okay, how is the project working in terms of integration, documentation, communication, and all that. And so it can certainly be a fit for your projects. So you definitely want to check that out. And then individual certifiers may have their own submission structure or platform to work with as well. So that's something you can discuss with the certifiers you're considering working with, to see what might be the best fit.
Right. And I would just add, these tools are really important, and particularly as the projects get more complicated, so that you can track what's missing and what's complete, where more information is needed. Because oftentimes folks get caught up and they forget about pieces of information that they just haven't provided, and they're wondering where their certification might be. And it's like, well, they're not all green check marks yet. You need all green check marks, and to really hone in on that.
Yeah, and I think I'll pick up on that, Ken, that documentation is key. So when you're making assumptions, say in PHPP modeling, or you don't have information on a product because it hasn't been specified yet or whatever, just really explaining to the certifier what you're doing is really important. The clearer, more comprehensive the communication, the smoother the process goes. Usually, when there's a breakdown of communication, that's when the certification process can become challenging for the entire team, including the certifier. Yeah, and I mean that's really brings to us a key point about teamwork. So just as the design team and even construction team, project team is best working in a collaborative, integrative fashion, to deliver the best, most cost-effective project. Integrating the certifier into that collaborative environment, I think is important as well. So while the certifier maintains a certain separation, right, it's a independent third party person or organization that's ensuring integrity of third party review process. Um, you know, keeping them abreast of developments on the project, really engaging with them from the get go as early as is feasible in the project, and having them understand different aspects of the project. I think is really important. That would really help streamline the process as well and make it a more favorable process. And yeah, if you come to the end and you're successful at completing certification, then the owner will be issued with a Paso certificate, and there's an option to purchase a plaque as well. So depending on the building standard, naturally, will the plaque and certificate will reflect that, whether it's passive house, EnerFit, or low energy building. But this is concrete evidence. Okay, the building has been certified. And then another area which is actually a great resource for information on different projects, technical solutions and whatnot is the Passivos database. You can see it linked down there as well. And this gives you a wealth. I mean, there's several thousand projects on there now from across the world. And some with quite detailed information. Some will even, you'll be able to download a case study. So here's an example of a particular project. This is many of you will probably recognize this, the Cornell student residence. Yeah, there's a detailed project documentation. It's probably about 40 pages of information about the project. So free to download. You can review it and understand, okay, some of the key aspects related to Passive House, how the project actually handled them. So we encourage you, if you're going through the certification process, to get your project up on here and provide as much detail as you can. And the Institute is making it easier and easier as we go to be able to upload this information. So it's not a huge amount of effort to actually provide this information into the database.
Right. And it's true that the project does not need to be certified to be in the database, but that PHPP needs to have been completed. So you need to be far enough along so that you know that your design is hitting the passive house metrics, and it could still be under construction or nearing completion, whatever state it's in. And you're putting out the information on the project there. It's a great visibility tool for visibility as well.
And there are plenty of resources for certification. So, Passwords Network website is a good starting point, with various links to different resources, as well as the Passwords Institute's website. So they got a section dedicated to certification, and in particular around buildings. So you can see the drop down list from their menu there, of different resources that you can download. So I encourage you to go there and look back every so often as well, because you want to make sure you have the latest version of whatever document or tool you're referencing. So good to check every so often. Yeah, and then there's a suite of specific tools. It could be very, technical tools, supporting tools for PHPP modeling. One tool in particular I'll highlight, which we have fully integrated into our practice and we use on every project, every consulting project, and we encourage projects that we're certifying to use, is Design PH. Very effective tool for early stage modeling of projects, as well as you can use it even through documentation of the project, and it links up really well with PHPP. And so we find this this actually helps us as certifiers be able to understand the project better and be able to review things quicker. So it can reduce both the cost and time for building certification. And further ones, so outside of the Passwords Institute or Passipedia, there are numerous other websites, including other organizations such as ourselves, Building Type in New York, Passwords Academy in Ireland, Warm in the UK, and other kind of organizations and even individuals that have actually released different tools or resources to help passive practitioners. Whether it's detailing books or special tools or guides for modeling or whatnot. There's a wealth of information out here to really engage with.
Great. So thank you for that brief overview of various certification issues and items. We want to dive into a conversation on multifamily. We weren't so specific. We had a little bits of references to multifamily here and there in the opening. But we want to get to questions. I certainly have a bunch of questions. And I'm going to stop sharing and move this over, make it a lot easier, and have a conversation about this. Carlos, yes, we will be sending out a PDF of this presentation so that everyone can have all the links and the information that's on it. For sure. So I know that there was one question that was pre-sent that we can check off here and then maybe go into a broader discussion, because there's a lot, I think there's a lot in multifamily to talk about and to find out more information of. But first, so there's a question on solar screens and calculating them in the PHPP. And I don't know if it's particular to multifamily, but certainly it has its applications there. And what you've seen and maybe ways to think about it, strategies to successfully incorporate solar screens.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, that might take a few forms. So, a screen, one interpretation could be like a blind, whether that's internal or external. Or, do you broaden it to more just any type of way of shading a window to prevent solar gain? So is that, fixed overhangs? And yeah, so in terms of multifamily in particular, we probably see less shading unless it's as a result of another component like a balcony that naturally shades, adjacent windows or windows below or doors below. But we find that they may get cost engineered out or value engineered out or slashed and burned out of a budget. Because they are, for instance, overhangs above windows when you're putting them across many windows on a multifamily can get rather expensive. But I think that like many things, often something's eliminated when just they see a line item and say, oh, that's too expensive, let's cut it. And, don't look at other impacts. It's okay, well, how's this going to impact my cooling load in suites? And, is that going to drive it to a higher cooling load and a requirement to upsize my cooling system, right? So I think they're worth considering for sure. I know fixed overhangs tend to be more considered than exterior blinds, at least in the North American projects we've seen. So the operable exterior blinds can be considerably more expensive. So we haven't seen them on many projects, particularly multifamily, but they are certainly an option to explore as well. They might be a bit more problematic when you're dealing with higher buildings because of potential for wind loads. So it's definitely going to be project specific, but we certainly look to incorporate them where we can, because the number one driver of cooling loads is the solar gain coming into the building.
Right.
So
and I think a big issue is if your design, if the success of your design, the design works based on certain shading, because of the size of the cooling and the energy demand and all of that, and comfort levels, it can't be valued engineered out. Otherwise, you're really setting up the project for unhappy owners and occupants down the road. And I think people struggle with that, right? And when they're trying to control costs and trying to control the energy balance. Is there any kind of sense of, winning strategy to make sure that we're relying on an amount of shading that we can know is going to stay in the project that's going to be effective? I guess maybe the fixed architectural shades that you're mentioning, but
I think that a big part of it comes down to how they're costing things and analyzing things when we're yeah at different stages of costing to understand the interactions, right? I mean, we did a presentation on demand control ventilation a couple weeks ago and went through, like, you can take away VAV dampers, but there's a whole bunch of cost impacts on that, which may mean you don't actually save money by removing them, right?
right.
So it could be a similar case with shading as well. So just avoid the trap of, or whoever's doing the costing or the owner, developer, try to have them avoid the trap of the simple analysis of just what's the line item cost in making a decision.
Right. And being really conscious of what's staying in or coming out. You've seen instances where things are suddenly not in the project anymore. And
Hmm.
I think that's part of the communication, right? Especially in these bigger projects.
Yeah. And I mean, on the flip side, in terms of when you're dealing with operable blinds, um, and relying on those, and when there's an occupant behavior aspect to it, you really have to, check your assumptions about how reasonable and how often are people going to be using those blinds. If that's to help mitigate peak cooling loads, you want to have good assurance that they're going to be operated as intended. Say sometimes when there's a bit of initial dissatisfaction in a passive house, a key component of that is education and occupant behavior. Not that people are behaving poorly, but they just may not understand how best to interact with the building. If you're dealing with a multifamily where you could have 50, 100, however many occupants, are you realistically going to be able to educate people sufficiently that they're going to operate it as maybe you as a designer or consultant envisioned?
Right. Right. Okay, good. Um, let me see here. So in talking about the experience and looking at multifamily in particular, where you're going to have a lot more consultants, you're going to have structural engineers and mechanical engineers that you may or may not have in single family homes, and many members of a team. What are you seeing out there in terms of multifamily with the teams that are assembled? What's the right balance in terms of who's got the CPHD training, how far are they going? What does the structure look like to tackle multifamily effectively?
I mean, we highly encourage all key project team members to, at a minimum, take the Passivos designer training, ideally get certified as well. But we want a common language for everyone to speak. They have the kind of fundamentals. They don't obviously become experts overnight or just through taking the course. But we've worked with teams that are green. They've never done a Passivos project, but they have the right attitude. They go through the training. They work at a very collaborative, integrative manner. And at the end, they deliver a project that's very cost effective. We did this a few years ago with a team, and it was actually part retrofit, part new build. And the additional costs for the project were 4% over conventional. A team that had
Wow.
never done it before, right? So, and I see training as a key part of that. The architects, the engineer, like mechanical engineer, electrical, structural engineers, even the key technicians, like architectural technicians, like the ones who are drafting the details. Like if they have a solid understanding of Passivos, they'll get what you're trying to achieve when you're saying, hey, add some insulation here.
Right. That's really interesting. That is a wonderful advertisement for training. Um, it's worth its weight in gold for sure. The What was I going to say about that? I think it's really interesting, and it's actually a very hopeful message that, we've heard before, um, that one of the main drivers, and I think it's true, of the cost premium that we'll sometimes see around passive house and multifamily as based on the experience or inexperience of the team, but that you can be new to this and do it cost effectively. Um, I do think, I mean, I would put out there, it's about eliminating all those points of resistance, right? It's where folks are not in tune, whether they don't have the education, so they're not just getting it, or they're just resisting um, going with the optimization flow on one hand. And the other hand, perhaps, maybe you could comment on this, is where they're bringing in the certifiers and where they're, at what points are they looking to optimize, and how are those decisions integrated? So do you have
Yeah.
successful keys to success around that with multifamily?
Yeah, I mean, uh, certainly the decision for passive house needs to be um decided early. Trying to take a design that's not have passive house in mind and then steer their ship in a different course. It's going to be a challenge for everyone. And I mean, it comes back at the very beginning of like careful selection of your team, right? And I know not every project you have liberty of choosing every team member or whatnot, but ideally, you get a carefully curated group of people fully committed to it, right? And to me,
Right.
that's more important than experience is the right attitude, the willingness to tackle new challenges, different ways of doing things. And that, particularly on the architecture side, as well as on the mechanical engineering side, those are the, two key areas of driving cost on the project in relation to passive house.
Right. And one thing is related to the cost, but also the process, I guess, and the schedule and just the general satisfaction is, um, when are issues being brought up in the process? And when you're dealing with new situations or things that aren't clear to team members, or you just don't know, um, if are people assuming that they can do something and then find out too far down the road that they actually can't do that. I don't know whether it's around usages, certain products. Um, we have the big question mark of unknown tenants in the future uses, and so forth. So I don't know. What could you speak to a little bit around multifamily and maybe the mixed use aspects too, where you've seen hiccups and what maybe the teams could have done to avoid them?
Yeah, I mean, this starts to speak to, this, you don't cover this stuff in the core training, right? The core certified passive house designer training. These are project specific challenges or aspects you might come across. So it's really important to engage with the certifier early on, right? I mean, ideally they come on board as the full certifier, right? But even if it's on an ad hoc basis, at a minimum, just to run some questions by them to make sure you're heading in the right direction, right? Fundamental question, right? If you have a mixed use building, got say residential for the majority of it, and then on the say the ground floor, you've got some commercial retail space or community center or other stuff. Well, how do you approach that from a certification perspective, right? And there are actually different approaches you can take depending on some different parameters on the project. Are the tenants known or not known in the commercial or in the non-residential space beforehand, things like that. So, and this, it should all be clarified early on. Don't wait till construction drawings are like, okay, ready for a review from the certifier to kind of sort these issues out, right? So the projects we've seen struggle and have issues and cause headache for everyone is when they wait too long, right? It just saves money, time, headache, everything by discussing these issues with a certifier early on.
So do you have like a entry form or something, an onboarding form where you put out, you know, all the potential issues and what you've seen, or how do you make sure that everything's getting put on the carpet to be examined?
Well, we certainly, probably every certifier has their own intake form or intake process. We'd have a question, we have essentially a Excel file that we ask people to complete that gives us a idea of certain aspects. Is there any special equipment? Is there underground parking? Is it mixed use? Variety of things like that to give us an idea of how complicated the project might be. Which obviously influences the price for certification, but also the issues that might come up so that we can, help steer the project in the right direction, and maybe pose some of the questions they may not know may not know to pose at that stage, if they haven't been through the process before, on a certification process on a particular project. Yeah, I guess you don't know what you don't know, so you might not know which questions to ask.
Right. So definitely you want to err on the side of asking more questions.
Yeah, and again, yeah, they asking more questions, and also if you're engaging the certifier, they'll point things out that you may not have thought about.
Right. And I mean, I don't know if this is actually true or not, but I'm guessing, the more you step away from precedents, the more questions there are going to be. So where you have certified passive house components, it's really clear, and there's precedents for using those, and everything's locked in. And as you step away, more and more questions are raised. Or if you see from the database or knowing of other projects that have been certified, what they have done, and whether you're conforming to that. I wonder too, though, like some of the projects that are done out there are done as pilot projects, and maybe you could speak a little bit to that. And they may look like precedents, but they're not really precedents.
Yeah, so specifically a pilot project. So, I mean, there's a kind of a formal pilot project which the Pacifist Institute will be involved in. So, it's like the first of ever of in the world of this kind, right? So, for instance, the first swimming pool, which was completed a few years ago, or recently, big news: the first hospital was certified as passive house in Germany recently. So yeah, the Passive House Institute has a very intimate involvement in that. Where there might be the next one. So say now if somebody wants to do a swimming pool in North America, well, not all of the requirements have maybe been set because, there isn't a strong enough history of enough swimming pools to really understand, okay, what is best practice, what's reasonable to set as requirements. And so there would be, probably there would be a certain level of engagement with the Pasos Institute. So the certifier that you appoint on the project would be liaising with the Pasos Institute to clarify certain requirements or whatnot, right? So it's it's a collaborative process, and that again, starting up early. The earlier you start in the process, we're dealing with a swimming pool. We don't know what to do here. Let's get some direction as soon as we can.
Right. Right. Good. Um, I think there's a question around finance, but how I'd like to kind of pose that in this context around multifamily certification is, what role do you see, or do you see any role with the lenders, the banks, the financing mechanism coming into the conversation of the project and what you're looking to do, and how that might reveal itself with certification? I mean, maybe if it's the financing's dependent on certification, right? There's a lot of pressure to get the certification done. I don't know, just putting it out there.
Yeah, I mean, probably have less experience with this side of things. Certainly, there's the policy side where a jurisdiction city might be requiring passive certification. Might be a public
Mhm.
building, might be affordable housing, what have you, right? That's not necessarily tied to financing, although there can be, there can be, and there's an opportunity for affordable housing funding agencies to tie financing to or funding to projects. I know there's a lot of great work done in Pennsylvania with the housing finance agency there, right? They've really
Sure.
defined some
And
great
different
yeah.
incentives like Mass
Mhm.
Save in Massachusetts, or incentives through NYSERDA, and other areas.
Yeah, exactly. Now, more general financing, if you're dealing with like the private sector, traditional lenders, yeah, I'd say there's less. I certainly have less experience directly with that. And we certainly had challenges sometimes with the traditional appraisal approach. We actually have a condo project here in Ontario, 10-story condo project. Developers doing a few new things, mass timber and passive house, and trying to have the appraiser recognize the additional value that's created is challenging. It doesn't really fit their kind of standard process or methodology. And that then affects the lending, right? So he wasn't able to unlock additional funding because he couldn't get it appraised appropriately, right? So he's now had to
Mhm.
find a different way. You obviously need some more money to build the project. There is an additional capital cost, but he needs to find a different route, right? And that's adding time and challenge and whatnot. So yeah, it's certainly not something I get really that directly involved in. So beyond kind of individual anecdotes like that, I certainly don't have a general strategy. It's not my my area of expertise.
Right.
So certainly definitely there's opportunity, more work needs to be done here in this area for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Question on related to cost is the cost of certification. Um, and maybe if you could just speak to that a little bit. I know there are a lot of variables. We actually had a presentation earlier this year by Matt Bowers, um, that really focused on um, what makes single family home. He was speaking to primarily, but there are bigger issues. Uh, uh, Certification process, the fees more or less expensive. Um, but maybe, and I'll see if I can drop the link to that presentation in here for people to reference. But I'm wondering if you might speak a little bit in terms of what you've seen, um, where teams and you've been able to do it very cost effectively, or different things that might drive up costs in certification.
Yeah. So I mean, there's some of the fundamentals of the project which are just reflective of the project, not the team or anything. It's just the complexity of the design. So what kind of uses do you have? If you have a mixed use building, you've got to deal with um, some non-residential aspects. That's going to be more challenging, more time consuming, right? The complexity of the build form, right? The more bump outs you have, the more junctions you got to deal with, so that the passive house consultant is going to have to do more thermal bridge modeling. The certifier is going to have to review more of that as well, right? Um, the and then the systems that are being used, you refer to certified versus uncertified, right? Any project where we've had components that aren't certified, say HRVs or ERVs, to actually assess the performance to ensure they meet passive requirements is very time consuming, difficult, and not recommended. We've had to do it in the odd project, and it takes a long time and costs a bunch of money. Um, so, and I know that's still remains a challenge, product availability, especially with ventilation systems in North America. So there's definitely uh, you know industry development or manufacturers releasing more products that meet requirements.
Right.
Um, and then it's about how you put the package together. The time it takes to do a review, like a design stage review, is very much dependent on how well the package is put together. So we generally go through, we have a kind of kickoff call with the consultant, certified consultants, to explain our submission process. Here's what we want to see. Here's how you can document it, communicate with us, right? And if you follow that, then it can go smoothly. If you don't, and we're missing information, it takes longer and becomes this iterative process when there's missing information, right? So collecting all the information as much as you can and make sure it's complete, and explain where information is missing, what assumptions you're making, how you're approaching it. That's crucial.
Good. I wanted to ask a question, well, related to that, and then want to go to a question on documentation, but the energy models, PHPP is the basis of the model. Do you see in multifamily a typical need to use dynamic modeling? How do people deal with, like, what level of complexity do you need to bring in, think about other modeling or what you're seeing out there for the regulators? And maybe related to that is the question about documentation and, what are some fundamental differences maybe between a single family home and a multifamily building if folks are looking to make that move?
So in terms of modeling, PHPP is the fundamental tool for passive certification. So regardless of the building type, PHPP needs to be submitted for, every specific, there's particular rules around, creating PHPP. So, if you have mixed use buildings, you're going to have more than one PHPP, one representing the residential, and then potentially one or more representing other parts of the building, depending on their use. Do you have a high intense usage like a commercial kitchen, or other kind of community based rooms, or so, and that would be really in discussion with the certifier to clarify how do you want to how should this project be approached. In terms of dynamic modeling, that can be useful as an adjunct. We've been using it more recently, support more refined load analysis for optimizing heating and cooling system sizing for the buildings. We're basically, in a way, we're trying to gather more and more data to eventually move away where we can from dynamic modeling and be able to, fully do things in PHPP, informed by previous projects and the results, right? So, so there can be cases for dynamic modeling, but in terms of certification, a PHPP has to be created for all
Right.
parts of the building.
That's baseline. Got to do it.
Yeah.
And what about the switch from single family to multifamily? And how you're thinking about?
What was the context again for the switch?
Just in terms of documentation. And what did Vlad say here? Describe what would be different in your expectations for documentation or calculations.
Right. Okay. One thing, obviously, the size. So we're going to probably have more thermal bridge calculations. There's probably more support around mechanical design. So typically, small residential, like single family home, you're kind of selecting components in a way that you don't have to do as much. You don't have to do as much detailed engineering, right? So whereas in the bigger buildings, you've got a mechanical engineer doing all sorts of calculations. So like pressure drop calculations to ensure the fans are going to be in the ERVs are going to be running efficiently, right? There might be some acoustic calculations or analysis to ensure you don't have any acoustic issues in the building. Blower door testing, right? That's a hot topic, depending on the size and complexity of the building. How is that going to be approached? And ventilation system commissioning. We've noticed on recent large multifamily projects, that's been problematic, whether it's from leaky ducts, so poor installation practice, or low accuracy measuring devices. or, various things. We're seeing, commissioning reports come back, or sometimes they can't commission the system, or the commissioning reports have big questions around them, right, in terms of accuracy of measurements. So it's really, I think, establishing during design, how is the building going to be properly commissioned, and getting everyone on board with that, including the commissioning agent.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Vlad? We good? I think, I guess going back to one of these things in multifamily, I don't know whether inexperienced or experienced, but if you have any kind of reoccurring kind of gotchas, moments where people just aren't necessarily, they think they have their eyes on the ball, but they're kind of missing something. There's like something around the bend that they're not seeing. Things like, sanitary pipe losses, elevators, booster pumps. I don't know what else could be out there. You have a full inventory in a multifamily quite often.
Yeah, and I mean, the submission should capture all that. So that's, again, coming back to early engagement of the certifier to make sure, hey, I've set up this initial PHPP model. Am I considering everything I ought to, right? Some things are easy to overlook. Domestic cold water booster pump, as an example, right? How do I account for that in PHPP? Or, just even thinking about accounting for it, right? So it's that early engagement to make sure you got a complete PHPP, even at early stage where you're making all sorts of assumptions. You don't have any products, you don't have sizing or whatever. There could be some rules of thumb you follow. Say, okay, this is a reasonable, maybe somewhat conservative estimate for how much energy this kind of system is going to use, right? So
Right.
that trips up a lot of projects, is not capturing everything that ought to be.
Right. What do you see? I mean, in terms of being conservative in early calculations or assumptions, and the process of tightening that up, or not in the building? I mean, you see these certifications where some buildings are calculating coming in way under the thresholds that are required. And I'm just curious, do you feel like there's a lost opportunity there? That's a smart, more robust way to approach it?
I
What's
think
your take?
generally, changes in your heating and cooling loads go one way towards getting higher, right?
Right.
So you're generally moving towards, maybe even past your target, right? So we like, we like to have a buffer in place below the target, so that generally, as the design progresses, certain things are maybe overlooked a bit, or you couldn't source certain products you thought you could, or you did, but the product's not quite what as you expected. They needed reinforcing in a certain door that makes the thermal performance worse. So now you thought it was reasonable, or based on your past project, okay, we can't use that anymore. Or if you don't have a past project, right, you're just making some reasonable assumptions.
Right.
So that those things slowly erode the performance, right? Now you certainly don't want to be too conservative from the beginning, but there's cases where, okay, you add some conservatism, and then you may in the future be able to relax and shave off an inch or two of insulation around the building, right?
Right.
um you have to balance it, because you get to a point where you've done all these drawings. Now, to remove insulation, you're going to have to redraw a whole bunch of details with less insulation. It could be more
Right.
redesign work, right? So there's kind of a balance there.
Do you have
um
to go really, I don't know, it's not really risky per se, but it's out on the edge. Do you have teams where they know they can get the blower door test, the air tightness down significantly, and they'll go to optimize below the threshold. I mean, we see, especially big buildings, big multifamily buildings, you can get considerably under the 0.6 ACH 50.
Hmm.
And and shave insulation, or make other optimization trade-offs on that basis. Do you see anybody? It's, if just saying it, it sounds like a dangerous game, but
Yeah, I think there is, the larger the building, the more opportunity that is, trade it off with, you've got many more people building the building. So how well is your quality assurance, quality control on site, right?
right.
But yeah, I mean, we for the car dealership we worked on, we had to set 0.4 because we couldn't meet with other constraints in the project. We needed to meet that in order
Ah,
to have the project certify. But we had worked with the architect, not the builder, but the builder was good. It was a pretty simple box, relatively speaking. So we had confidence we could do it, and we did. We hit it, under 0.4. And you have a colleague at West, Pierre Andre Santa, and he's another certifier actually. He's doing smaller projects, right? But he'll set different targets depending on his confidence in the team, especially the builder, right? So if he's worked with the team before, he's like, okay, yeah, we can hit 0.3, no problem. I full confidence, we're going to design it right and they're going to build it right. Boom. So he'll design off that basis.
that's incredible.
Um, right. Whereas if it's a new builder, not sure, okay, well, probably won't add that. Uh, add, he'll keep to the 0.6, right?
Right,
So I think there's definitely an opportunity. It's just how much confidence do you have in achieving that?
right. You want to have a few buildings under your, have a track record of hitting the number.
Well, and you know what? Even there, so some of you may know Scott Kennedy and our Cornerstone Architects. They do a lot of kind of mid-rise multifamily in Vancouver. 60, 80, 100 units. They've got a few projects under their belt. They do a great job, and they can meet passes. They can certify. They worked on a project that ended up being very complicated. It was a co-housing project. It basically had 50 owners all wanting something slightly different in their unit, and so they ended up with a complicated envelope. So despite highly experienced architects, experienced builder, experienced team, they were struggling to meet the airtightness target, and
Wow,
that came down to the complexity of the building, right?
that's really interesting. Um, in speaking with these larger multifamily buildings, you have more commercial grade components and doors and windows, entry doors, revolving doors, um, things around ventilation, and so forth. What do you see in terms of product selection where people might get caught up, um, or kind of misconstrue what the strong pathway is? And you're dealing with, obviously, with ADA issues in the United States and the equivalent in Canada. Um, yeah. Any
It's
stories to tell there?
yeah. You probably can't find a door that meets fire, accessibility, all the requirements in an entrance door and passive house. Like I don't think it actually exists. So you're
Right.
usually
It's a hole in the
compromising on
building.
something, right? Yeah. And so often that, you just the passive house side, because it's not for a given door, it's not critical, you need fire, you need accessibility, whatever. There's other requirements that dominate over passive house. So then you're okay, well, what's the best we can do thermally? And do we need to offset anywhere? Usually one entrance door in a big building doesn't move the dial thermally. You just have to check, are there any issues around mold growth or condensation, things like that, right? Or any kind of local discomfort. Often they're in vestibules, so you don't have to worry about occupant comfort, right? But there's things beyond just the thermal performance you need to look at. Air tightness, right? So actually, it'd be more important to look at a door from its air tightness perspective than thermal, I'd say.
Hmm.
Um, right? And that was actually the case for the car dealership. We found a door we unfortunately had to import from Germany, but we were most concerned about the air tightness. And thermal we got pretty good actually. But we wanted assurance that it was going to be an airtight door, right? So we had to do some digging to find something suitable.
Great, great. So yeah, I mean, that's one of the things too, as the buildings get bigger, these multifamilies, you can have these exceptions and issues as long as they're planned correctly and fully integrated and vetted early so that
Yeah,
you know you don't have a
exactly.
problem. Don't bring it up at the end of the project.
Yeah, exactly.
That's probably the single best piece of advice. Early, early, early.
Yes, yeah, that's it. The projects that are most challenged are the ones that are coming to us or another certifier late in the game. If you're
Yeah,
at construction drawings and that's when you're first talking to your certifier, you're probably setting yourselves up for a bit of a headache.
right. Don't assume anything and hear it from the certifier.
Mhm.
Don't. I think another big issue is, it could be innocent enough, and it's a game of telephone. People have experiences. Oh, we've seen this. Oh, we've heard that. Oh, so we start to make assumptions about what may be possible or not possible. Get it from the certifier,
Mhm.
and know in black and white what you can or can't do.
Yep.
All right. Well, we're at time. So thank you for your time today, Andrew. This was super informative. I enjoyed it. Thank you, everyone, for attending. If you do have questions following up, feel free to get in touch. And we will be making snippets of this video available. And we need to actually do the single family one earlier this year with Tad and Steve Mann. Get that up online as well. We will continue this series and be doing single family again in the future. So I know there's some folks particularly concerned with single family, but we're going to do that next time. And then continue on with multifamily and hopefully get into some other specialized uses. So thank you so much and hope everybody has a great day.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Andrew. Bye-bye.